Welcome to Just Verdicts with your host, Brendan Lupetin, a podcast dedicated to the pursuit of just verdicts for just cases. Join us for in-depth interviews and discussions of cutting-edge trial strategies that will give you the keys to conquering the courtroom. Produced and powered by LawPods.
Every trial lawyer wants to know, how will a jury see my case? Today, we're diving into a game-changing approach to case analysis with the creators of Predict, a powerful tool that goes beyond traditional mock juries and focus groups. I'm joined today by Pete Mansmann, Rich Epstein, and Oscar McKnight to discuss the origins of Predict, how their Vista and Fusion products help lawyers gain real insights, and why AI and data-driven analysis are reshaping trial strategy. Plus, if we're lucky, we'll dig into actual case studies to see how Predict delivers results in the real world. If you're serious about understanding how juries think, this episode's for you. So let's get started. Pete, Rich, Oscar, welcome to Just Verdicts, guys. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, you.
Brendan.
I'm looking forward to this. I've been pestering you guys for a while now to come on, get this together, and talk about Predict, which I've been using very successfully for some time now. So I will also point out that, Just Verdicts, we're hitting milestones all the time. And you three gentlemen are the first three-person interview that I've ever done on the show. So congratulations for whatever that's worth.
Like the Three Stooges. Right?
We shall see as this unfolds. So trying to maintain this in a somewhat organized structure today, we're going to talk a little bit about backstory. Then we're going to get into the current products, how this has evolved, what the current offerings are, and what they do. Then we're going to dig into the process of how Predict works. And then we can hopefully talk about some case studies, some takeaways, and AI, of course, which is everybody's favorite topic currently. And hopefully the listeners can really understand how your product works, how it can help them, and get some valuable takeaways today. So with no further ado, Rich, let me kick it off over to you. And can you talk to us, because this has been around a while. I can remember when you first reached out to me talking about this product and what you guys were trying to do. What inspired Predict, and tell us about the origins of your product.
Yes, about 25 years ago, I was a small town lawyer here in Mercer County, as you know, and one of my counsel in Ohio told me about Oscar and what he did. I had a couple unusual cases. I think I had a grandmother who ran over her granddaughter. I had a grandfather whose grandson fell off the back of a mower and he ran him over. And I wanted to try and figure out how people are going to react to a daughter suing her mother for running over her, unusual fact patterns. And it was Judge Rice over in Ohio recommended that I talk to Oscar and see if he could do a survey. He said, this guy's amazing. You should see the results that I get. Every time I do it, there are things that, as good as we think we are as lawyers, you never think of. So he did those cases. And I was amazed at the results. There were key phrases and ways of talking about things. I remember I had a guy that lost his leg. A waste management truck backed over his leg and he lost his leg. And Oscar did the survey and he was walking behind the waste management truck and the waste management driver said hello to him. And everybody that reviewed that case said, that was like a social contract. That was like a contract telling you, I'm not going to run you over. And things like that. Power line fell on a woman. She had a closed head injury. They said, well, we understand on the outside she looks okay, but inside her head's mush. It's like a piece of fruit and ways of describing things. And I was very impressed with the results. And it's market research, really. And I said, how are we as lawyers thinking that we can present a case and not do some type of market research on this to see how people are going to react? And you can basically measure anything. So, so I said, Oscar, let's go into business. And, obviously Oscar's always been about the science and the results. His price was so modest. I said, this is a tremendous value, and we as lawyers need to use something like this. There were focus groups, but what Oscar did, I think he told me yesterday when we were talking, he started out doing descriptive stuff and going to the community and interviewing people, and then he designed Delphi groups. And that's the unique part of what we do, even though most of the world still calls us what we do focus groups. It's distinct from focus groups. And I'm glad that great lawyers like yourself understand the difference. Not that focus groups aren't important and people need to use those too, but the predictive aspect of what we do, the demographic data, and the ability to go back and forth, run something once or twice are pretty unique. I don't think there are too many people that are doing that. And originally we had two other people involved with us, and they we were trying to figure out, well, what do we not do that focus groups do? And with technology, we could take 2 minutes of an opening statement and we could evaluate that. It doesn't take long for facial recognition software, things like that. So we can be as creative as the lawyer wants to be. I think that's an important takeaway. This isn't a static, this is a service that can be customized. So if you want to measure, one case we had a sexual harassment case, if you want to measure the lawyers, which I would think in certain cases you might want to do, and we do both sides. We do defense or plaintiffs. We don't know what we're doing. I mean, that one case, it's shocking, it's scary, but they were focused on the woman's jewelry and how the one lawyer didn't look like he should be representing the bank because he didn't have this kind of tie or this kind of suit and all of those things. So you can drill down and measure just about anything that you want. And with technology and evolution, we've applied a lot of different, facial recognition software, textual analysis. Some cases we analyze text, sort of like AI. I don't think as in the past 25 years, each time Oscar does something, our results are a little bit different. There's no standardized product, as you've probably seen. So let me see what else.
Well, Rich, let me jump in with a couple questions real quick that I think maybe listeners might have. And, I appreciate you suggesting that I know what I'm talking about. I think I just keep up a good appearance, but I probably have major questions too. And one of them I do. I mean, as many times as you guys have talked with me about the Delphi groups, and I think I have an understanding of how they differ from your typical mock juror group of panel that we would do in a DIY focus group. What is the difference? Do one of you want to explain, because in these reports that you guys do, there's always the Delphi groups, whether you do a full-blown one with 10 of them or you do a hybrid with AI. Tell us about that concept and how it differs from a traditional focus group.
Well, I'll jump in and do the difference. There's really two primary differences, although they're very, very big. Unlike a focus group, a lot of focus groups are just run by whoever you have in the office, or you get 10 random people and you put them in, or 12 random people. Delphi group starts off with what's called a norm population, which means that of the 12 members in that Delphi group, if you have a 12-member group, it's normed to the national population. So you have people in there who are 25 years old, and you have people in there who are 75 years old. You have people with no high school diploma or high school diploma, a bachelor's degree, and a PhD. So the first thing that starts off with the Delphi group is how it's normed. So it's normed toward the national population. The next thing difference between and it's a major difference between a focus group and a Delphi group is Delphi groups are intact group, which means we can go back to them. In a focus group, you run it for an hour and a half, you get the information, and it's done. In Delphi groups, they're put together for a purpose, for a reason, and we can go back to them. So if we run a Delphi group today, and we have a question 2 days from now, I can go back to the Delphi group because we remember the case, they were all together, and I can ask them another question. And the beauty about a Delphi group is that we can experiment with the Delphi group, because when I go back to the Delphi group, often we want to test a new concept. So when I go back to the Delphi group, I will tell them, hey, I messed up. I forgot to tell you a really important piece. And I will introduce that thing, and I'll introduce that piece of information or evidence. I'll say, does this make a difference? And they'll say, yeah, absolutely, it makes a difference. You should have said that before. You're an idiot. Why did you not tell us that before? But when I go back all the time, what I'm doing is typically I'm going back and telling them I made an error. I should have added this. I should have taken away this, and get their new responses. But the bottom line with the Delphi group is that it's an intact group that we can go back to. And a lot of times we can go back to, up to a month, because these our Delphi groups, again, the difference between most of the time, again, another important point is our Delphi groups are not paid. Everybody volunteers to be part of these groups. Versus focus groups, you typically pay people to be part of the focus group. And we found early in our research with Rich and I, we're doing a lot, and again, I'm a university researcher as well. We found out that if you pay participants, you don't get the same results, and they're not predictive. And when I say predictive, I mean whether or not we look at historical cases, paid versus not paid, and which ones predicts the outcomes. When you get volunteer participants in a Delphi group, their input, their concepts, and their decisions tend to predict the actual outcome. When you pay somebody for it, there's an implied pressure one way or another, and you don't get valid data. So again, that's maybe longer than it has to be, but that's a brief overview of what a Delphi group is versus a.
And one significant aspect, Brendan, is that he has so much information on each one of these groups. And as we've evolved, I mean, we started out, he had socioeconomic, IQ, everything like that. Because I say, well, how do you know that this matches Mercer County? Well, then he takes the national norm and then converts it by a formula to Mercer County demographics. And so it's evolved from first socioeconomic, IQ, religion, politics. Now psychological profiles are a big part of it. So when you get the results and you see all the different breakdowns in the demographics, that's significantly different from a N size of 1, as Oscar would say, that's just merely descriptive versus predictive.
Yeah, I forgot to stress. Yeah, I forgot to stress that. I did say it was nationally normed, but I didn't say how it was nationally normed. All our participants who volunteer to participate in these studies, I have at least 13 variables on them. Like Rich said, I have their IQ, I have the personality, they own a home, do they have children, are they married, so we have religious affiliations, anyway, careers. So all that's in our database, and that's how we can predict what people are going to say based upon what they do or where they live or their occupation.
So when we do a recap call, like I remember one of your cases, politics is a big predictor now, one of the strongest ones. But I remember in one of your, I think it was an orthopedic surgeon case, that it was counterintuitive because the Republicans gave the larger verdicts because of his military background, as I recall. So when we do the recaps, that's an important thing too. Oscar has all the data on individuals, and he can say, well, here's the 4 nurses, and here's what they did, or here's the social workers. So I think that's powerful information.
Is on the topic of the Delphi members being volunteer versus the traditional, you pay your participants for their time, is the concern there, if I'm sure you know, Oscar, but is the concern that by paying them, it creates a potential bias toward the moderator or the people doing the group? And if so, I mean, what if you completely anonymize it and you do all the steps necessary to take out that you're affiliated with one side or the other? Is there still an effect there that you think makes it significant to use volunteers versus paid participants?
If you could make it completely unbiased, then maybe that would work. But here's what normally happens. As much as you try not to do that, you're presenting your case. And somehow it comes through. And in fact, even when we give out the surveys from the Delphi groups, they will, a lot of times they'll say, oh, this was written by the plaintiff's attorney, you can tell, right, based upon the things. And again, they all know that most of the time it's true. I have no idea, really. By the time it gets to me, I have no idea which side I'm working for. And I always tell them that as well, and they know that. But you can, based on what you say, how you ask, and where it's even located at, where you run the focus group at, will give them a good impression. And because it's an impression which side they're on, and because of that impression, and because they're getting paid, they have a tendency to lean to that side.
Got it. So let's talk where we were going. Rich, you sort of told us about, your initial introduction with Oscar, and, all you guys are evolving, getting better. And I would imagine that, what Oscar you were doing 25 years ago, I didn't realize you guys went that far back, for a variety of reasons, has changed substantially over time. What are the kind of the biggest things that have changed as you look back on your jury research compared to 20 years ago up to today?
Do you want me to answer that?
Yeah, go ahead. You start.
I feel like, when I look back 25 years, it's pretty much, I did this, one of my master's degrees is in statistical research, and my thesis was scientific validation of jury selection. Right? And that was way back. That was way back. But the way we did things back then, we would interview people on the street. We would ask them if they would stop. We're going to give you a little scenario, ask if they would participate, taking a survey. We used to go to restaurants, outdoor restaurants, and give people surveys, so they would sit there while they were eating their hamburger and fill out a survey for us, right? So that's how we started off. And everything we did originally was all descriptive. Like Rich said originally, we just said, oh, this is what people said, bam, that was it, right? And we had no demographics. We just went out and we looked for insight. We tried to get the largest insights we could, number of participants. We filled out the survey and gave basically that information. Whatever they said, we reported. All descriptive and all pretty much whoever we could find on the street at that day, right? And again, at that time, it was all, we only did things by area. So we would only work in one because we wanted to get people from a certain county or a certain state. And that's very difficult if you're working across the country. You can't do that, which we do now. And anyway, we started off before interviewing people, and it was all descriptive, and it was just randomly finding people. The way we do it now has evolved so much; it's light years ahead. Now we have participant pools. At any one time, we have over 700 people participating in our pools, and like we said earlier, we have all the demographics of everybody in our pool. And again, from IQ, the race, the political affiliation, the religion. And the other thing that was brought up too early when you talk about different groups, when Rich said about nurses or doctors, in our pool it's so large that if for some reason you want to know how doctors view this case, we can send it out to, we can make one Delphi group nothing but physicians, or one Delphi group nothing but teachers. And we have the ability to do that in a lot of different specialty areas. And again, we never had that ability to do when we started this off. The other thing is now is we do most of our stuff, well, not most, all of our stuff now is via the web. I can run focus groups and I can run Delphi groups. I don't run too many focus groups anymore, but most of our Delphi groups are all done on the web. So I can do a Delphi group and I can bring in people from all around the country. We meet, we go over to this case, and there's a structured pattern to how we do it. And then the way we do now, like I said, we started off with all descriptive data, and now we do forecasting, we do prediction, because now we can run prediction models with everything based upon demographics, based upon concepts. And so now we can modify, say what variables predict and which variables don't predict. And we can do it for both sides. So we went from really a descriptive model where we interviewed people, individual people, who random people we just found. Now we have contained data pools, contained people, all the demographics, and now we do predictive summaries. So that's, in general, what the evolution of this product has become.
And the statistic, obviously most people are familiar with being able to predict elections from a small sample. I mean, the statistics and the analysis behind it is very similar to the political arena. And you as a lawyer, one of the things is, when you just say, I'll say to Oscar, well, can you take one voir dire question and predict the result based on their answers to that one question? And the answer is yes. So, I mean, or can you take the data from our analysis and then when you know what the jury is, then predict how that what the results are going to be? The answer is yes. You just feed that data into the formulas and you can predict the case. So there are all sorts of applications that you as a trial lawyer can think of and say. I mean, most of the time people wait pretty close to trial and have us do a predict report. But throughout the whole process, there are all sorts of applications which you would realize. Obviously, the earlier you identify the themes or your weaknesses in your case, the better prepared you are in your depositions, the better prepared you are for when you get to trial, or even when you're picking that jury. And then you have data on those jurors, you can plug it into the report and have an analysis of liability and damages that matches that particular jury that you pick.
Let me connect that with something Oscar mentioned earlier. You're right. I mean, I think the one of the many sins all of us trial lawyers make is waiting until the last minute to do studies and do a lot of things on our cases. I'm as guilty as anybody as that's concerned. But let's take a scenario where you have a general sense of the case. I do mostly medical negligence cases, and I have the medical records, so I have a lot of the information and my client's point of view of what happened. So let's say I run a predict study, and Pete, we're going to talk about what the latest studies are here in general that you guys are offering. But let's say I do one at the very beginning. Imperfect information. I haven't taken depositions yet. I haven't done written discovery. And I get feedback. To Oscar's point before with these Delphi groups where you can go back to them and sort of add and subtract ideas, is it possible to run the project at the beginning and then sort of go back over time, add, subtract as you learn new things? Or do you really need to do a full fresh one towards the end once you have everything? Do you see where I'm going with that? Like, can you make it a sort of like a living Delphi group throughout the life cycle of the case, or would it not necessarily be able to be carried out that way?
I think one of the restrictions is that people's memory. So if you have a Delphi group and they take a study and you come back 6 months later and you try to reassemble them, they may not remember the facts particularly enough to be able to give you meaningful results back, or maybe they're not all available. I think what we've found, at least when we're going back and asking questions again, is typically within a certain limited amount of time where we can go capture those people and they still have some of these facts fresh in their mind. The AI is a different story. And I know we're going to be talking about that, but it's added a whole new element where, when we're applying an artificial intelligence engine on top of the human results, it's maintaining all that. And that's queryable at any time in the future. Oscar can talk about this. That's probably the one area that we've all just been blown away more than anything else in the last year about how far that's come in a short period.
Well, I want to save the AI goodies for a little bit later, because that's what I'm obsessed with talking about lately myself. Oscar, I want to talk, and this goes to Rich's point before that, and I have certainly noticed this, that, over the many projects I've done with you guys, the, end product looks different most times. I mean, there's been a couple, maybe I did them close enough in time where you guys hadn't evolved in that period that they looked somewhat similar. But most of the time, I'm like, oh, wow, this one's totally different. That one thing's not here anymore, but this is here now. And this is kind of interesting. But one constant I do notice is, Oscar, it seems, and I'm assuming you are the, for lack of a better term, the moderator of the Delphi groups, that once we go through and we get through that fact pattern and the readers have sort of approved it and gotten down to, and we'll get into some of the nuts and bolts about the way you guys do your studies, because I have questions about that as well. But once we get there, my review pretty much consistently of all your reports is that it seems like you go chunk by chunk by chunk of the fact pattern. And number one, is that true? Is that typically how you do it? And number two, why do you do it that way?
Yes, we do that way. And it's actually it's a very powerful technique. What we do, what you're talking about, just so for clarification, if we get a survey, we construct a survey, and the survey may have 25 paragraphs in it, for instance. What we will do with the Delphi groups is we will go paragraph by paragraph with them. Well, actually, the first two Delphi groups go through this. So the first two Delphi groups, when we do it online, what I do is I flash the first paragraph, and they've never seen the whole survey. They've never seen the whole case. And so I will flash paragraph one, and they will read paragraph one. And then I ask them, what do you think? What's going through your mind? And they will say, bam, 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 whatever they're thinking. Then I add to the second paragraph. Now they have the first paragraph and the second paragraph. And I said, now what do you think about the second paragraph? And is there anything I should know about the first paragraph now? So we go through the entire process that way because there's a couple of reasons why we do that. First of all, it becomes really in-depth. You get an in-depth understanding of all the information as it unfolds, Because again, this is one of the things that we've evolved over the years. We used to give the whole survey just statistical, what do you think about it? And what happened was we got 2 sentences and 5 sentences, from the thing. But when you go paragraph by paragraph and block it down and they don't see it on our screen, I just shoot one paragraph at a time. Now it causes all sorts of discussion because they add to it. And the other beauty about that is they will reflect back on it. So if I introduce something or the survey introduces something in paragraph 6 that contradicts something they saw in paragraph 2, they'll say, well, wait a minute. That's not what you said in paragraph 2, So again, why do we do it? Because we get a really in-depth analysis. And the other thing is you can see how concepts build on each other. All right. What did they say initially versus where do they end up at and what's important in what order? So that's one of the reasons we do it that way.
And just like a jury, Brendan, you got to spoon feed this to people as well for them to digest all that information. And I think we're finding more and more that, the younger the generations there are, the less likely they are to read a lot of information in particular. They'll accept it a little better if it's auditory and certainly better if it's visually. But, the bite-sized chunks, because that's how they're used to getting information everywhere. And you have to give it to them the same way.
And you get individual responses, and then you get the group collective deliberation, which is similar to a jury. So it measures both.
Yeah, and it seems to me, I'm trying to think of kind of what the analogy is, but it's almost an open-ended versus a leading or closed-ended question. When you give them that little piece, the universe of where this case could go at that point is, it could go all a million different directions when they read the first paragraph. Whereas by the end, or if they were just to read all of the entire fact pattern at once, that's the universe of the case. Everything has sort of been like, this is it. They may still have questions, but I think when you guys go and you probe through these different sections, you can really understand 2 important things. One, what really had no bearing on them at all in a given section. Okay, like nobody commented whatsoever on this one fact that was mentioned. They were all talking and thinking and wondering about this. And it helps us understand kind of their preconceived notions. And I'll make one anecdote, and I don't want to go too much in depth because it's an active case I'm working on, but there was that psychiatric case that we studied recently, and I thought it was fascinating where people wanted to know the distinction of whether this person's mental health condition was something they were born with versus or was it, medication or drug induced. Remember that issue? And I thought that was fascinating. And depending which way you guys told them to it or they were asked about it, it had significant impacts on the way they viewed the case and actually, I think, decided the case one way or the other. And I'm not sure necessarily that would have come up if you had just read the whole fact pattern to them.
Yeah, you're right. The other thing I should probably stress too, and again, is there's so much to what we do. I know we're going to forget a lot to say, but one thing about reading each paragraph, they become more engaged. I mean, as it unfolds, it's sort of like a movie. They're watching the movie, they get engaged and start talking about it. But the other thing I've noticed since we've done this, and you probably noticed it on some of the reports we've given, they will start expressing their true feelings and being sarcastic or being downright, outrageous about what they say. They wouldn't do that if they read the whole thing. But as they build and become sort of get into the case, they will say there is no filter. And again, on the report, you probably see, I write what they say. There's no filter what they will say when you do that process. You won't get that in a sort of a focus group. You won't get that go to survey if they read it all at one time. So that's the other reason we segment it out to really get to what they're talking about. And like what Rich said too, is when you do it that way, you find common words or themes or sayings or analogies that they will use that you can use as an attorney.
And it's sort of it's effective as a lawyer, we're careful not to judge our cases. We're lawyers, not judges, and not to try and force our clients too much towards settlement or toward trial. So this gives a little bit more of an objective check. So I find, when clients read these reports, they sometimes understand the strengths and weaknesses of their case much more powerfully than you can tell them as a lawyer. I mean, I remember I had one motorcycle case where it was cruel, but I mean, they kept saying, this is not a David Letterman Harley guy. This is a GED Harley guy. And this guy, didn't make it past 7th grade. And he understood, the perceptions of motorcycles or things like that. So, and then lots of times you're good at that. And the lawyers that do this more often are, lots of times it's what you leave out and let the Delphi groups use their imagination that helps bring out some of these things. If we have a tendency in lawyers to want to put everything in that, poor Pete's got to keep the surveys a certain length, but they'll come up with most of the stuff. And sometimes that's actually healthier to leave stuff out.
Well, let's talk about that, because I want to, for anybody that hasn't done a predict, as a starting point, you guys will provide essentially a guideline packet that explains how the format should be thought and put together by the attorney or attorneys requesting you guys do this study. And I won't go into the importance, I think, kind of the hidden benefit of doing any focus group or, a predict is the preparation even beforehand helps tremendously just in and of itself. It forces you to really think through your case a lot more than we would otherwise. But one thing, and I think by now I know why you do this, but at the beginning I balked when I first was working with you guys that, my entire case, neutral statement, plaintiff case, defense case, everything all in had to be right around 1,500 words. And, for all of us that I was like, no way. No, I mean, even the most basic of car accident cases, I would need more than that to properly get the nuanced. But over time, I see that that's not true. But tell me why you guys insist on the fact pattern being so condensed to 1,500 words.
Oscar, that's best.
There's a couple of reasons for that, right? One is when we get the original, Pete gives us the original report from the attorney saying what the case is all about. At that point, we give it to readers. And our readers are normed from both ends as well. And they will go through all that information and they will actually highlight for me what they think is important. And from that, anything that's not important or just distraction, we eliminate right off the bat. All right. So again, it's a way of sort of screening it first way. We cut out a lot of information. The second reason is sort of like what we've said before, Richard said, and Pete, we've talked about the length of the survey. A lot of people will not read 2,000 words, 3,000 words, 5,000 words. Remember, these are volunteers, and they'll even tell you that it's too long. We've done a lot of what's called top of mind studies, where people read a whole thing and we say, what was this case about? And they can read a 2,000 word case and they can give a synopsis in about 75 words. All right. So the bottom line is condensing it focuses strictly on the facts. We get more participants that way. And like Rich said, too, the information we leave out is is sometimes more important than the information we put in there, because if it's missing, they will say, I wanted to know this, or this is real important, or they make the assumption, that, which is even better. They'll say, oh, I know what type of person this is, or I know what type of situation this is. So reducing it causes actually more discussion because they don't have all the facts. And if everything is laid out there, when we run our Delphi groups, there's nothing for the group to discuss if everything's there. When information is left out, they got to start filling in the blanks. And filling in the blanks actually tells you a lot of information.
And if they get off kilter, you can go back and correct if that doesn't happen too often, but you can do that.
Well, and one of our clients has used us probably more than anybody else, who also happened to be one of the guests on your a prior podcast episode, Dave Quass. He now, on average, I would say when he sends a narrative, it's 1,000 words or less. I mean, he's under what our minimum or maximum requirements are, and he's learned, and he's told us this, that I'm interested in what their thoughts are. I'll give them the base framework of what the case is about, but I want to know what they think. And I think he's very effectively utilized the system and the program in that way. And he's gotten very efficient at doing it. And it's the same way that, a typical predict process allows you to ask 10 specific questions. Most of the time, he won't even ask 10 questions. He'll get a few in there. He knows they're going to answer the questions about who they find at fault or not at fault, and what they think the case is worth or not, winnability or not. But other than, very specific things he really thinks are important, he wants to just hear what they think are important. And I think he's done a really good job at managing that way.
Can you guys give me a sense? I mean, so Dave is now getting so efficient and embracing, the shorter summary fact pattern of the case. What are, sort of the best or rules of thumb for coming up with an ideal fact pattern in a given case for you guys to run? I know you have the readers and you give us feedback. Hey, this should be tweaked. This should be taken out. This was redundant, etc. Pete, you just raised an issue on the one we're running right now. But what are some, kind of heuristics as far as how I should be thinking? How should anybody that's creating the fact pattern for you guys to run the predict should be thinking about what to put in and what to leave out?
I'll just say I don't want to put any restrictions other than the 1,500 word restriction at the beginning. I'd rather you put it all in there and give it to our readers, let them screen it out. Because once you start screening out on your own, you might leave out something that could be very important to the readers, is what I'm saying. So what I'm saying is I don't mind getting, actually I do mind when you give me 3,000 words, but when you give me, 1,500 words sort of thing or 1,600 words, I'm going to give it to the readers and they're going to chop it down and see what's important. So we actually filter down. I just hesitate sometimes if somebody chops it down too much because they're trying to follow these guidelines, there's some probably important points that should have been left in there that we never had a chance to screen. So, I don't know if that helps or not, but I don't want to chop down so much that we lose the essence of what it's about.
But I was going to say there are some cases. Some cases are complicated. There's a lot of treatment, and the treatment timeline is important, and you have to get all those points in there. There are other cases that are really simple, and I think what happens a lot of time on some of the simpler cases are that people feel the need to fill 1,500 words up in 10 questions when maybe that's not necessary. So I think it's really a balancing, fact pattern. If it's a catastrophic, type of case where somebody died, it is what it is. You might have to explain some of the things that led up to it, but you're not going to have a long history of things to try to illustrate. In that case, maybe you don't need 1,500 words. And I think it's a tendency of people to say, well, this is what I'm given, I should fill it. And that's not always the case.
Yeah, I think what I'm more worried about are those situations where, I have a birth injury case and, there's all these different potential significant issues. Like there's a battle over placental pathology. There's a battle over the blood gases. There's a battle over the strips. I mean, and that's in addition to the overall story of what occurred that evening. And so then, you're sitting there worried like, well, I don't want to leave out something critical for you guys to run by the jury. But on the other hand, I don't want to stuff this full of information that people are going to tune it out. And I think the fact knowing, because you guys always reference to me, oh, the readers, I just assumed it was like Rich or Pete or something. Little did I know. And that gives me peace of mind. No, I'm just kidding, Rich. But it's helpful to know that you have it screened that way, and then people tell you, hey, this is what's kind of jumping out to us as significant, not, because then that helps catch, or as a fail-safe, I suppose, as far as making sure that you do have everything, but not too much in the fact pattern.
Yeah,
and your weaknesses are key too.
Yeah. And I typically, and when I say I, it's usually myself and Aaron from my company, will typically take a first pass before we even send it on to the readers. And a lot of what we're looking for is redundancy in facts that have been played out there, excessive adjectives and adverbs. These folks want the facts. You don't have to illustrate, some of that. And then it's just a natural tendency to advocate for your side and explain things like lawyers explain things. So oftentimes you can skinny it down just by taking that first pass at it, which we often do, and then we'll send on to the readers who will break it down into the essence of what they feel is important even further. And I think that whole process, to your point, Brennan, is good because at the end of the day, a jury is only going to listen to so much, only going to retain so much, is only going to pay attention to so much, and you have to really figure out what are the major points that you want them to remember.
Let's pivot to, Pete, I think this is probably your domain. The current offerings that you got, I call you, Predict, that's sort of the umbrella term. And within it, you guys have different offerings. And even, Rich and Oscar earlier talked about, how, kind of granular you can get on some of the things if you want to study them. But what are the big picture ways that, somebody comes to you guys and says, hey, I've got this case, I'm going to work it up. What are the current offerings that they can select from, and, what are the differences?
Yeah. So right now we've boiled it down to, there's two primary offerings. And what I will say to caveat that is that, there are so many directions that this can go, probably will go, that, Oscar is so creative in the way that he's looking at the data and the way that we're able to analyze it and measure different pieces, that I don't want to tell everybody that this is the two static things, this is all it's going to be. But most people come to us for one of these two products. And so we used to call them a full predict and a hybrid. They're now called Vista and Fusion. The difference between the two are there's a couple pieces. So today, every predict that you do, whether it's a Vista or a Fusion, has an AI component to it. And we actually call it HAAI, which stands for Human Assisted AI. So it's not AI by itself. It's AI learning off of what the humans in that study have told it, and also looking at what other studies in the past have also revealed on different types of cases, similarities, and things like that. So the AI that we're using to supplement our reports is being fed by previous studies and this study in particular. And that's important because, a lot of AI engines, you can't just put ChatGPT fact pattern and get the same kind of results. It doesn't have the data sources to query. So the hybrid or the Fusion one uses less people. There's 24 participants, which are 2 Delphi groups, and where it's actually 4 Delphi groups, but the way we break them up is that we have a Delphi group of 6 people. We put 2 of them together to mimic what a jury would be, to be 12. And that becomes one group that takes the study individually. And then also is the groups that get together and discuss like a jury would. So the Fusion approach uses 24 people, 2 of these groups, that take the survey results, discuss it just like a normal full predict study would go on, answer questions, and go through the comments like we talked about. What you don't have in a Fusion report is the demographic information that you may get from a full predict. Now, that's one big difference. And what I mean by that is that a full predict, what we're calling Vista, will normally have 120 plus participants. So you'll have 10 of those groups at least, and sometimes there's more. We have enough participants at that point for Oscar to provide statistically valid predictions about what's going to make a good or bad juror, what kind of demographics of people are driving different concepts in your case and award values and things like that. With the fusion, we don't have enough people that we statistically can say, hey, this is information that you can put a heavy level of reliance upon. So that's one of the major differences between the two products right now. It's a quicker turnaround time. It's less expensive. And we found that, some people find that the information they're getting out of there, that, critical concepts and award potentials and valuation that they're getting out of it is what they're looking for and is perfect for them in a lot of situations. It's easier to do earlier in the case versus a full predict. The Vista takes, 4 to 6 weeks to complete. You have to have enough time. And, it's more complex and more expensive.
So now you've laid those two options out, and I've done both. And most recently on one of my cases, I did the hybrid. So 2 Delphi groups and then HAAI. And one question and I know I bugged you about it, but I think, you guys in the debrief, you gave me so much information, I was still thinking about something else. So tell me about, and maybe my case was a one-off, or maybe you're seeing this a lot. So Delphi 1 in the project that I'm referring to, put a ton of fault on my client, a large amount, and much smaller percentages on the potential defendants. Delphi Group 2, much less so, but still a significant amount, and more on other defendants, okay? But overall, looking at Delphi 1, Delphi 2, human beings, I'm losing this case, at least based on the way the facts were presented at that time. But when I go to the HAAI, my verdict probability for a plaintiff verdict was much higher. It was, in the 75 to 80% range. So what accounts for that? That the HAI was so different in that case, predicting the verdict likelihood compared to the people in the Delphi groups?
Well, Joe, I'll answer that again. It gets into the evolution of sort of the product what we're offering. We started off doing basic descriptive stuff, and then we get into old school like insurance databases. Says you got a broken arm, it's worth this amount. Then you get into what we used to do, like linear regression, taking 3 variables and predicting what it's amount. Then we went into AI, artificial intelligence, was pulled from all different sources. But like Pete said, that now we're doing human-assisted AI. That's what the HAAI stands for, human-assisted, which means that when you have your 2 groups, all the participant comments from the groups, they'll do it individually, and they'll do it each paragraph as we go through. And then they all give sort of a summary of what they think it's together as group think. But what happens with human-assisted AI is we take all their individual responses and all their group responses and then create what's called training sets. We put that into our AI program, if you want to call it that. It's human-assisted AI. And what it does is it learns patterns based upon what people said and individual assessments. And so the reason you get a sort of a different thing from the human-assisted AI is because, first of all, it's reading all the information from every individual in every group, where everybody in the groups are not doing that. And it's looking for patterns based upon what individuals said. If individuals knew what the other person said and processed it, you'd probably get the same value. But the advantage for the human-assisted AI is that it gets to incorporate all the information, look at patterns, and actually can I'll predict it'll predict what you're going to say probably before you're going to say it, because it has all the patterns. It has all the patterns that can do that. So that's why the human-assisted AI gives you sometimes it can be a big difference based upon what the groups say. Like Pete said too, that's the hybrid model. Now, if we would have run the 10 groups or 12 groups, it would have all probably balanced out if we would have had the 10 groups. But when you're only talking about 2 groups, and this is always my worry with running the 2 groups, is sometimes groups come to a deadlock. They won't even answer. They'll say, I don't know. We can't answer this. All right. The AI can answer it. The human-assisted AI can look at stuff and make projections based upon that. But sometimes it always worries me about that, because there's no guarantee that group as a group will come up with responses. So anyway, that's the basic difference why you get a different response from the human-assisted AI versus the straight AI. And again, that human-assisted AI is really a really big part, because I know everybody in the world is talking about AI, but there's levels above AI, and human-assisted AI is one of those things.
And Brendan, if you're, in a perfect world, your case that you had, we'd run it through 1,000 Delphi groups, and we would see this pattern over time that would tell us, hey, we've done it 1,000 times across 12,000 people. That's reliable information. The AI is able to virtually do that and extrapolate upon this and say, hey, if we take this further out, this is what the predictive qualities are going to come from this. And, it's always a balance between, you get interesting things that come from human beings that we're always surprised at what somebody comes up with, but the AI is just getting smarter and smarter and coming up with its own stuff as well.
Yeah, so have you, now that you've been doing a lot of human-assisted AI projects, and I know it's probably unfair to paint with a very broad brush here, but what's the trend that you see? Meaning, do you see the human-assisted AI tracking pretty closely to what the two Delphi groups come up with, or is it pretty different? Do you see what I'm saying? Like, what I'm really trying to ask is, was mine an outlier, or are you seeing that in some instances when it really digs into all that, the responses from the human beings and synthesizes it, you're generally getting a better outcome, ultimately, or not necessarily?
I don't know to a degree to say here's the percentages, but I would say from most of what I've seen, I don't think there's usually been huge differences. Yours may have been one of those outliers.
Yeah, yours was an outlier.
No, we do. When I say when I check it out, run validity checks on it, it's pretty consistent. The human-assisted AI is actually really good, and maybe you've noticed in some of your cases that it'll come up with things that was never said by a participant, putting together concepts and pulling, because our database is so large, it can pull concepts. And actually, I think maybe I shared with maybe our last review meeting, I've been amazed at how sarcastic our human-assisted AI program is getting, because it's learning. And again, when I talk about training sets, I maybe a lot of people don't understand about training sets, but first, before we could run anything, it's not like we could just ask it a question. Before we could do that, we had to program in for training sets what people said, what type of person said what, and the computer learns. It creates general profiles, and then you could ask it questions once it goes to the training sets and learns. And it combines that based upon, we have two major databases. We have our own proprietary databases that Rich and I have gone back 25 years that's loaded in there. And then we have national databases and insurance databases that it'll pull from. So in most cases, it's really pretty accurate, mimicking exactly what you get from the other groups. But I will say, and we talk about this all the time, Rich and I, when we have our meetings, and the last meeting with Pete, we talk about it. The human-assisted AI is getting very, very powerful. You can get more out of it than I ever. If you would have asked me this even 3 months ago, I would not have told you how much information we can get out of it now. And it only because it's learning. And the more we put in there, it's learning more you can do. But anyway, I don't think you're missing too much from it. You're missing some specific demographics. But even that now, the program is coming up with other ways to solve that problem. So I don't know where it's going to go to. We talk about the evolving sort of things. With artificial intelligence and now with human-assisted AI, and there's something we haven't talked about, and I throw it up every once in a while with Richard. Human-assisted AI uses something called fuzzy logic, and as more and more it applies fuzzy logic, the smarter it's getting.
And for us, simpletons, what is fuzzy logic? Sounds like something I use generally. I've been using my whole life, but go ahead.
Fuzzy logic would be a good example. Okay, here. This would, suppose I asked you a general question. What's your favorite color, right? And I ask 20 males and 20 females what the favorite color is, right? Typically, everything in computers is binary. It's 1 or 0, right? But in male, female, Males traditionally statistically 1, females are traditionally 0, which gets people in trouble sometimes. I don't know why, but it's it's either 1 or 0. Okay, the bottom line, if you're any other numbers, the computer won't work. It doesn't work. But here's what fuzzy logic does. So we ask someone sort of a series of questions, and then we ask just like their sex, binary sort of sex. Are you male or female? And then what's your response? What fuzzy logic does is goes through there and says, oh, okay, we know the sex and we know the question and we know what males say and what females say. And then what it does is it runs what's called a deviation, a correction formula. It will go back to you and we may have coded you as a 1 being a male, but you didn't answer exactly like a male. So the computer will say, you're not really a 1, you're a 0.7, So it'll automatically make corrections in your responses based upon knowing you better than you know yourself. You may identify as one thing. We get that a lot of times with political. People will identify in our database, they'll say, I'm a Democrat or I'm a Republican. But on a lot of cases, through fuzzy logic, the computer will say, yeah, you may think you're a Democrat or you may think you're a Republican, but you're not answering like one. So fuzzy logic is a way that the program self-corrects and actually changes the demographic profile of someone, what they say.
And Oscar, does it kind of match the way we offer up options for questions where it's not just yes, no, it's absolutely yes, maybe, because most people don't think of things black and white. It's how strongly do you feel about your answer? And that gives you a lot of nuance in saying, if all we were giving you is yes or no, you could have a very different feel for how people are answering a question versus giving them some gradients in between.
Yeah, and that there's some statistical properties that we can do with prediction. That's the other reason why we ask for those 5 sort of ratings.
And one thing the AI does, which I think is amazing in med mal cases, it can search every medical treatise in the world. And I'm amazed, as good as the lawyers are that we work with, the AI sometimes comes up with med mal theories from the literature that, that experts haven't gotten to.
I mean, that happens now presently with me using the paid version of ChatGPT, giving it, the facts of the case, the opinions. And I've had a couple of different instances where it has pointed out something that had not been considered by anybody else. And then I bring it to the experts and they're like, oh, yeah, that's actually a really good observation. I act like I came up with it, of course. But so let's pivot to, your product, the umbrella name, of course, is Predict. In the every report I've ever gotten, there are percentages. There's averages of verdict amounts, and of course there are percentages of your win rate, good or bad. Can you talk to us about the thresholds? I mean, I've heard over time that if you're 50-50, like you're a 50% chance of winning, you're not probably even 50% of winning trial necessarily. But maybe I have that wrong. And it's more, and there's certain thresholds, like if you're up to a certain percentage, it's almost more than that percentage you're likely to win the case. Am I somewhat right there? And can you explain that with a little more detail?
Well, you are absolutely correct. I mean, statistically, if you flip a coin, right, 10 times, if you flip a coin 100 times, it should be 50 heads and 50 tails, all right? Unless you have a loaded coin, all right? Just like Vegas. Vegas will pull a loaded coin if you're flipping a coin if all of a sudden it comes about 62. If you have 62 heads or 62 tails coming up on 100 flips, that is a loaded coin, which means it's not happening by chance, all right? Same thing when it comes to, the probability level that the AI comes up with or what the participants come up with. You're really not confident in your case until you get above 62%. That represents technically the reason 62% is there is because that actually represents a half standard. That represents a half standard deviation of a normal curve. So if you're a half standard deviation above what's expected, that's not happening by chance. It could either be above or below, but that's not happening by chance. So that's when you get those probability levels of, for instance, a plaintiff verdict. You're right. If it says 58%, 52%, or 56% or whatever, it's still a coin flip. If it says 62, 72, 78, Now you know it really is in your favor. The chances that are coming up by chance are always going to be less than 0.05.
And what's the reverse Mendoza line for below which you're in deep trouble?
Well, it would be the same thing. If you add 13%, really to the 50%, right? You get really 62%, 63. We call it 62%. Take 13% away from it, and that's when you have trouble.
And is there, human beings, I think we're all very subject to this, that we're not good with probabilistic thinking. And, you see, I'm 60% and 40%, so I win more often than not. And it seems like people start to think they're going to win every time. And then if they lose, they're like, oh, that study was all wrong, or that was all that, and it's like, no, 40% of the time you lose that. Is there an aspect, and maybe you already kind of, mentioned this just now, Oscar, but, is there a group dynamic aspect of it why, you may be essentially a lock, at far less than 100%? Is it still the same, standard deviation issue, or is it a group dynamic aspect? Is it, how does that, do you think, play out practically in a jury deliberation?
Well, I may not understand your question. I'm not exactly sure how to answer that.
Well, I think one thing, Brendan, if I can jump in here, because I think this will go along the lines of what you're thinking. And Rich is always the big sounding bell for this, if you will. He's always said, and I think he's correct, that the most important things that come out of these reports are the critical concepts.
Oh, yeah.
So you have percentages of probability and win, and that's important to tell you. Do you have a strong case, weak case, fight, flight, that different type of stuff. But coming out of this and saying, here's what people are hooking onto as the strengths, here's what people are hooking onto as the weaknesses. If you reran that again, emphasizing your strengths or building your case around your strengths and isolating your weaknesses, your percentage of win might go up. And really, that's the name of the game here, is to say, how are you giving yourself the best path forward to take you from 58% to 75%? And that's all driven by these critical concepts and what people are going to really believe about your case.
Yeah, just like politics. Trump, there might be 12 themes that are important, but you need the 2 or 3 that are going to cause people to vote plaintiff versus defendant. And that's what this is all about. The lawyers that use our services, like Pete said, just to get value and liability, that's not the best use of our service. I don't think it's for trial lawyers like you that take the themes and apply them.
Yeah, and again, just to expand upon the AI, it's the concepts that are most important that'll come up. It'll drive the value one way or another. But in the full predict report, there's a conceptual mirror that typically comes out, where the strongest argument is paired with the weakest argument and vice versa. And again, that process looks simple, but I got to tell you, as far as how that's derived, after the participants read all the surveys and read all the comments, I go back to them. Again, this is the Delphi group method. I go back to them and say, what is the strongest argument in this case for the plaintiff? And they will say, they'll all agree this is the strongest one of them. And I'll say, what would be the counter argument that the defense would use to counter this? And they'll think and they'll come up with one. So that conceptual mirror really tells you what are the strongest argument in what order, rank order, as far as that. And we also do, and again, you're aware you've done this, we do a word cloud that breaks every concept in the survey and every concept that the participants use into a hierarchy. Which ones and what's the value of each concept? So when it comes to sort of driving case values or verdicts, if you stick with the concepts that are identified by all the participants that are most important, that's you're going to drive the most out of it. What I have noticed on my end is sometimes based upon the questions I get, I can see where the legal counsel or the attorneys are going in the wrong direction based upon what the based upon what the participants are viewing. So anyway, those concepts are most important. From the word cloud to the conceptual mirror, those things are worth their weight in gold.
So I want to wrap up with talking about where you see your product going over the next, 2 to 5 years evolving, given how fast everything seems to be evolving right now. And also, just as an aside, out of curiosity, have you guys toyed with, whether it's an offering or, like an appendix to one of your reports, when you gather all the information, from, whichever predict study the attorney has utilized, having your AI, whether it's human assistant or just the straight up AI, providing a, whether it's a proof chart, or an opening statement or something like that. You know what I mean? Like, here would be an example opening based off of what we learned that, would essentially capture, the most critical information that we learned from this project.
Well, Oscar used to include an opening and closing statement till Rich and I said, nobody's going to care about that. So, yeah.
I was just going to say that, I included that because
we did
AI
that.
Hey, Brendan, I'm glad you said that so much because
I'm with you, Oscar.
I included it, all right, because the AI at one point said it was needed to know the opening and closing statements. In fact, on the last one we did, I put it in there only because the AI stressed it. But again, through my brain trust, told me, eliminate that. Eliminate that.
Well, first we asked you whether you could do it. You did it, but then we didn't like what we got.
Well, the other things, and I am putting it all back in now, regardless of what they said. It is back in there now, opening and closing statements. Actually, if you see some of the new report we just did, it's really powerful what they put in there. Even key points to drive home that they come through with. But the other thing the AI is coming up with now, naturally, that again, human-assisted AI is different than AI. But the other thing that's coming in there now are questions you should ask in voir dire to eliminate or include somebody to be aware of where they stand. So that's something that's new with the human-assisted AI that it can do now. It'll give you sort of questions you're going to panel somebody or not. You better ask these questions. All right. So anyway, there's a lot of like Rich said in the beginning. We've done so many, and Pete said too, we do so many one-off sort of projects, whether you're just asking one. Sometimes you can ask one question and predict the outcome of the case just by knowing the answer to one useless question. It could be a generic sort of question. Or, like Pete has we've done before too, is if you give us the demographics of all your potential jury pool, who potentially could be on there, we can run all the demographics because on the jury pool list, it'll have their age, their occupation, all this stuff. We can run that through our program and tell you the probability of a plaintiff's verdict based upon the demographics of the pool.
Yeah, in fact, we've talked about this, that if you do a full predict study, and so we have the demographic information that says here's the best and worst jurors for your case based upon this study, you go to trial, you pick your jury. Well, some of the demographic information we know by looking at them, male, female, general age range, you're going to know occupations and things like that. We can feed that back into the program and say, this impaneled jury has an X percentage probability of finding for your case or not because they're good or bad jurors. And additionally, these are the types of concepts that are going to ring true for this impaneled jury based on how they're put together. So that feedback loop, if you get to trial and have a jury actually sat, is something we've talked about doing.
Yeah, I mean, that case in Louisiana, I think they got the largest plaintiff's verdict in the history of Louisiana. They have pretty strict rules on damages there, but I mean, they use that demographic data to a T. I think it was women, and I forget what the other demographic, but age and age and sex. But yeah, no, that can be very powerful. But we'll include those things in your next report.
Yeah, please. What and is anything coming to mind as an example of one of these kind of more random questions that based on the demographic information was helpful in identifying either good or bad jurors for the case?
The way we've done that in the past, and again, it seems it's counterintuitive, but I'll explain the process to you. When we have in our database, we have a lot of generic questions. We ask people, what's their favorite Disney character? Right? Some people say Pluto. Some people say whatever. All right. It's a useless sort of stupid question. The way it's introduced is that if you're trying to get to know somebody that you're going to interview in panel, You can just say, hey, by the way, you ever go to Disney? What was your favorite character, right? The reason I say that is because we've run studies where we have people read the entire case and then tell us the verdict, what their decision, but we also ask them a useless sort of question. And we found out just how they answer that useless sort of question will actually predict the outcome of the case based upon how they frame things, their top of mind awareness, and their concepts. So sometimes you can even ask, it doesn't work all the time, but does it work more than often? Yeah, it does. It does.
I can only imagine some judges, how they'd respond to me, including what's your favorite Disney character as part of my voir dire. Pete, what were we going to say?
No, I mean, one of the things that's in the reports, it's a sort of footnote when you're trying to figure out, because another big piece that can drive someone's how they view a case is their personality type. And a simple way of analyzing that is, asking them what are their hobbies. And that tells you a lot of what somebody's personality type is. You could probably guess that somebody who collects stamps might be vastly different than somebody who skydives. And so those two things can tell you this is somebody. And if personality traits, an empathetic person, a feeler versus a thinker, if that's a critical demographic in your case, it can help you decide, are these good or bad jurors that you should be considering.
Love it. Well, guys, I have a bunch more questions, but we've already been going for an hour and 10. And maybe if one day I haven't scarred you too bad with this experience, you would be willing to come back and talk some more, because there's a lot of other issues that I'm fascinated about, and I think other people would really want to learn more about. But for today, we're going to end this great discussion here. And for attorneys listening who haven't worked with you guys before, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you and begin the process of doing their own predict study?
Yeah, it'd probably be to reach out to me. They can email me at Mansmann, MANSMANNP @precise-law.com, or they can call me at 412-281-8699.
And I highly encourage, anybody out there with, a significant case they've got coming up, they think may try. You guys don't sponsor me yet, but I'm doing this because I really like your product a lot. I've gotten a ton out of it, and I find it fascinating. And so that's, I would highly recommend people try working with you guys, because I do think that it brings a next level benefit and value to your chances at trial. So thanks, guys, so much for doing this. And I hope that we can do it again. And I'll be talking to you very soon about the current case I'm running. That's a wrap on today's episode of Just Verdicts. A huge thank you to Rich, Oscar, and Pete for sharing their insights on how Predict is transforming case evaluation with data-driven analysis. If you found this conversation valuable, please do me a favor, share this episode with a fellow trial lawyer who could benefit from it. And if you haven't already, please take a moment and rate and review the podcast. It helps more lawyers discover these game-changing insights, and it helps me, your buddy Brendan. So until next time, keep learning, keep refining, and keep fighting for justice. And I'll see you on the next episode.
If you enjoy the show, please subscribe to the Just Verdicts podcast on your favorite platform and consider leaving a review. And if you're interested in co-counseling, local counseling, or referring a catastrophic injury case, we'd love to work with you. Call us at 412-281-4100 or visit our attorney referral page at pamedmal.com/refer. Thanks for listening.